My name is Lucas Mahasha, and I'll be your facilitator for today. We are going to be dealing with a very relevant but serious topic that has plagued and has caused serious discomfort to businesses locally and globally in the last 6 to 8 months. And this is not about COVID-19. We understand that COVID-19 has financially destroyed businesses, but today our attention will be focused on another topic, cyber attacks and their exploits within South Africa and globally. For this, we have a panel of cybersecurity experts who are going to unpack all that we need to know about the impact of cyber attacks within all our businesses. Before I get to the panel, let me introduce you to our host for this event, Morar Incorporated, represented by the founder and managing director, Mr. Roshan Morar. Roshan?
Thank you very much, Lucas. Colleagues on the panel and to all participants, I welcome you and thank you very much for participating in this webinar, especially that October is the month of cybercrime. Speaking to our international partners, it is an education process that continues. Some firms have been doing it for in excess of 10 years, and it's a learning every day. And we hope that as an emerging black firm, we first in the forefront to be able to present this webinar, and together with the resources and the skills that we have as a firm. Good. As Lucas mentioned, my name is Roshan Morar. I am the Managing Director of Morar Incorporated. At the outset, we are extremely excited to bring this webinar to you as it falls directly within the firm's vision and thought leadership program. And more importantly, its relevance that cyber attacks could pose to your business and are posing to businesses irrespective of the size on a daily occurrence. The South Africans, we thought, will be extinct from that. We are not. Morar Incorporated has been, and we're proud to say, that the forefront of innovation and technology. And in keeping this cyber security awareness month, we thought that today's session has been well placed for us as a firm to share our thoughts on this animal of a topic called cybersecurity. You would read it recently as the last 2 days that the Guardian's Fund in KwaZulu-Natal was also hacked. Ransomware now occurs in small businesses, jumping from 1,400 Rand to a couple million Rands in terms of ransomware attacks. And before I pass you over to Lucas, I would like to thank the participants, but also to welcome two dear friends. The previous Minister of Finance, Nslan Shanene, thank you very much, my brother, for joining us. And also the previous Director General in Office of the Presidency, Dr. Cassius Lubisi. Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, friends, for participating. With that, I hand over back to Lucas, who will proceed to facilitate the discussion going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Morar. Let's just get straight into the business. So we have a panel of 3 cybersecurity experts that have joined us for today, who will share their insights and thoughts based on their experiences locally and globally. This session will take about 45 minutes. And during this time, you, the participants, will also have the opportunity to raise any questions or comments that you may have online. And I will request the panel to respond to at the end of this particular session. Please be reminded that due to time constraints, we may not be able to cover all your questions and all the relevant topics related to cybersecurity. But our experts will provide feedback to all the participants based on the questions that you sent through to us. You can also use the following email address to send your questions through to: cybersecurity@morar.co.za. and we'll include all your questions in the overall response to all participants. One last thing, please feel free to respond to our poll questions that you can complete on the Zoom webinar platform. A quick introduction to the panelists. Mr. Jeff Olesnik. Jeff is based in Minneapolis in the US. He's a seasoned cybersecurity expert and has been serving clients globally for over 20 years. Jeff is a frequent speaker and author on risk management related topics, including cybersecurity, incident response, and business continuity planning. Next, we have Mr. Mkolisi Kanye. He's the resident cybersecurity expert at Morar Incorporated. He has more than 12 years of leadership experience in IT risk assurance and cybersecurity. Mkolisi has extensively worked and consulted in various industries in both the private and the public sectors. Lastly, we have Mr. Nishal Kushal. Nishal is also a renowned local SAIT professional who has more than 20 years of leadership experience in the cyber forensic and information security environment. He is considered a thought leader in the field of cybersecurity, forensic technologies, and data analytics. Welcome, gentlemen. So let me start by painting a picture of how cybersecurity has evolved over time. So the online world has become a cornerstone for the global society, important to virtually every aspect of our infrastructure and our private lives. As we look to the future, new online technologies help us to address important societal challenges, from improving education and healthcare to advancing agriculture, business growth, job creation, and environmental sustainability. So recent events, however, have put online security at risk. Malicious actors with motives ranging from criminal to geopolitical have inflicted economic harm. They've put human lives at risk, and they've undermined the trust that's essential to an open, free, and secure internet. Attacks on the availability, confidentiality, and integrity of data, products, services, and networks have demonstrated the need for constant vigilance, collective action, and a renewed commitment to cybersecurity. Just to highlight a few stats from the Evil Internet Minute by Risk IQ. In 2018 cybercrime revenues were 1.5 trillion or $2.9 million per minute. Losses from phishing alone were about $1 million per hour, or $17,000 per minute. The cost of global ransomware in 2019 was $11.5 billion, or $22,000 per minute. Number of records compromised was 8,000 per minute. The number of victims of ransomware attacks were 4 per minute. And that is only in 2018. I wonder what is the situation at the moment, because ransomware has proven to be one of the most common attack vectors that is being used by hackers today. So against this backdrop and reflecting on the above statistics that I just alluded to, let me pose the first question to you, Jeff, our global expert. Please give us some insights as to what you believe are the most common cybersecurity incidents impacting businesses today.
Thanks, Lucas. Great question. I'm delighted to be here, and thanks for having me. Really, there are probably the three most common cybersecurity incidents that we see. The first is ransomware that you've already spoken about. That is the type of an event or the type of incident that hit the Guardians Fund earlier this week. Essentially, with ransomware, what happens is it's malicious software. It gets onto somebody's computer network, Many times it's sent through an email and somebody opens up an attachment and it downloads a malicious file onto a computer, and then it encrypts that file, or it encrypts that entire hard drive. And the criminals will send an extortion message saying, you need to pay us in Bitcoin and we'll send you the decryption key. So organizations that don't have a backup and recovery plan that they can restore from, many times will have to pay that ransom. And the cost is not only the ransom itself, but really the true cost is the cost of downtime that's associated with getting things back up and running. The second thing that we see a lot is what we call business email compromise. And with a business email compromise, a cyber criminal is trying to impersonate someone of authority's email, and they'll send a message to an employee requesting something like a wire transfer to be sent to a new ABA and account number. If that employee trusts that message is coming from the CEO, out goes the money, and the business has a significant loss. So it's really critical for organizations one of the ways to combat that is to make sure that you have an out-of-band way of authenticating types of requests for either a wire transfer or confidential information. Don't respond to the email. You want to send a text or call or some different way to verify that was a legitimate request. The third thing that we're seeing a lot of is really Office 365 attacks. A lot of organizations are utilizing Microsoft Office 365 for email. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations are using poor passwords. And so what a hacker can do is run a password guessing or password spraying technique so that I guess at commonly used passwords against all your employees. And if somebody has a poor or a weak password and they're not using multi-factor authentication, they can get into the Office 365 account and then do some damage from there. And one of the common damage things that happen is an organization will compromise the Office 365 account of a controller, and they'll see all of the invoices that are going out to customers. With that information, then they target the customers and let them know that they need to pay a new ABA and account number that isn't for the company, it's for the criminal. So it's really critical to safeguard your email as well in Office 365 and use stronger authentication methods. Back to you, Lucas.
Thank you, Jeff. Let me now bring in Morar's in-house expert, Mkolisi Kanye. Welcome, Mkolisi. Please, Mkolisi, can you please provide us with your thoughts and insights on what has happened in the last 9 months during the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically dealing with the impact that cybersecurity has had on businesses? Mkolisi, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. Thanks, Lucas. That's a great question. Thanks for having me. It's been quite scary times for both businesses and individuals at large. I mean, where business resilience has been really tested. I mean, we've noted businesses shutting down as a result of COVID. And it's not only in South Africa alone, and it's a global thing. From a cyber security perspective, I personally think COVID-19 is the largest ever cybersecurity threat to businesses at the moment. Let me just walk you through what we have observed in the last 9 months of the pandemic. So there's been a spike when it comes to cyber attacks, ranging from your social engineering, where attackers exploit or gain private information resulting from unsuspecting users. There was also a rise, what we call phishing attacks, where attackers pretended to be trusted in institutions or individuals. in an attempt to persuade you to expose your personal data and other important information. We also noted a surge when it comes to ransomware. That's in Q2, where attackers infect your computer with malicious software and display messages demanding fee to be paid in order for you to get your systems work again. Among these mentioned attacks, email phishing attacks were the most common sources of data breach at the moment. I remember the month of April, Google blocked around about 18 million daily malware and phishing attacks that were only related to COVID. I mean, scams, they also increased by 400% over the month of March, making COVID the largest ever, I think, security threat to businesses. We also had, I mean, on the news, where 500,000 Zoom accounts were compromised and sold to the dark web. Recently, I was reading an article by IBM saying the cost of data in 2020 so far is 3.86 million US dollars. Let's remember, not only businesses are being attacked, individuals as well. For instance, we're downloading COVID-related applications. We're also being tricked into downloading ransomware disguised as legitimate application. All these are the result of a shift from remote working, where businesses were solely focusing on operations, and security has been an afterthought. Most businesses were focused on solutions or tools that can enable employees to work remotely, in the process actually neglecting your security controls. The scary part, Lucas, is these are the only reported incidents that I'm talking about. How about incidents that haven't been actually reported or detected? As we all know, it takes around about 179 days to detect a breach. I mean, thanks, Lucas. Over to you again.
Thank you, Mkolisi. That's a very sobering, but yet so true and practical. You mentioned that businesses need to be resilient. So can you please unpack to us what you mean by business resilience?
Oh, sure, not a problem, Lucas. To me, business resiliency is the ability for an organization to quickly adapt to disruptions, maintaining continuous operations, and safeguarding its employees' assets, as well as the overall brand equity. That is to say, organizations should be having mechanisms in place to anticipate, to prepare for, to respond, and actually to adapt to both incremental changes and disruptions or major disasters, be it your cyber attacks, your pandemics like COVID-19 right now, as well as your natural disasters, which is your flooding, earthquakes, tsunamis, etc., etc. In simple terms, it means you're just taking a blow and recovering from it. From a business perspective, that means when a disruption occurs, let's say, for instance, a cyber attack, you should have mechanisms in place to absorb the hit without actually impairing significant, impairing to your business operations. Most organizations need to have actually effective cyber resilience frameworks. And in order to have that, there are certain principles that I think organization needs to adhere to. Just to mention a few, a thorough understanding of an organization from internal and external context. You need to have your robust or effective risk management processes in place that are going to be embedded in your business processes. You're going to need your good governance and management processes in place. So what are we saying here? With these principles in place, an organization can deploy a coordinated approach that can provide, what can I say, adequate resources needed to enhance business resiliency. Thanks. Over to you again, Lucas.
Thank you, Mkolisi. Before I go to the next expert, I would just like to reflect on my experiences regarding 3 things that a business can do to improve their resilience. One of the most important things that businesses should do is to make sure that there's proper governance and assurance in place. By that, I mean, there needs to be some buy-in and support from the board and from the executive committee of the particular organization. The second key component related to governance is around there should be proper governance structures within the organization and proper processes that needs to be followed within the organization. And then there should be a usage of what we call internal audit or external audit as a means of ensuring that there is independent assurance of the credibility of what is being done. And finally, one needs to ensure that there is a proper information security management system that is put in place within that particular organization. That can be found within ISO 27001. The second key component is to manage and to protect the organization. To do that, you need to have what we call proper policies in place, the relevant tools that are required to protect the organizations against attacks, proper assessments like penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, patch management. And then the most important one that most organizations fail to do is what we call awareness and training, to make sure that all the internal stakeholders, employees, the board, understand the threats related to cybersecurity, the importance of cybersecurity, and how they need to behave related to cybersecurity. And then the next one is they need to have the ability to identify and detect whether they have been hacked or not. So they need to have monitoring tools in place, as well as threat intelligence that they use to be able to monitor what's happening within the industry and within their environment. And then finally, they need to have the ability to respond and recover whenever they have been hacked. And that will require a proper incident response plan. And related to that, you need to have what we call a business continuity plan so that your business can be able to continue to operate even after you have been hacked. So your IT continuity as well as your business continuity has to be in place. But taking on from that, related to business resilience, let me now go back to Jeff and ask him, what should a typical incident response plan encompass? Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Lucas. And picking up on your last comment there about having that incident response plan in place, it's critical to have a playbook on how the organization is going to respond to any type of an event, whether it's a ransomware event or it's a loss of facility because of tsunami or earthquake or whatever, or fire. But this is an area that I find that most companies or many companies are woefully prepared. A lot of organizations put a lot of time and energy into making sure they have preventive controls in place like firewalls and patching systems, but really don't have a robust incident response plan. So I think that it's really critical to have an incident response plan to help an organization guide them through dealing with cyber incidents. And that's going to limit the damage and also ensure that mistakes aren't made. So some of the things that should be involved in an incident response include things like a clear definition of roles and responsibilities. So who within the organization is going to make decisions as to whether or not we need to invoke our disaster recovery or incident response plan? Who from the organization is going to be in charge of communications? So when the media is at the door asking about a ransomware event and how it impacted you, how is that message going to be coming out? And then how are we going to be messaging to employees? And then who's going to be also assessing and managing the damage and coordinating with the insurance company? collecting information and being able to identify, what the damages are so that the insurance policy can pick up and help make you whole in the process. The other thing that we see that should be in every incident response plan are 4 key stakeholders that are outside your company. One of them is going to be an attorney. Who would you go to help guide you through what the notification process is? What are your regulatory requirements with notifying, customers or employees of a data breach? Those are things that an attorney can assist you with. The second piece is your insurance company. There may be provisions within the policy that require you to use, certain vendors of theirs, vendors that are on their panel. But you need to understand what is covered by the insurance program, but then also, what's covered within the policy. The third piece is digital forensics. That is a real area of specialty. If you need to do a forensic investigation, or you think that an incident is going to go to litigation, you need to figure out who you're going to come in to help, who you're going to bring in to help preserve the data, capture the information, and do a forensic analysis so that you can be successful with a digital forensic investigation. And then lastly is some assistance from a public relations firm. The messaging and the communication is going to be critical, and it can either, greatly compound the damage of an incident if the communication isn't right, or it can really, help in the situation as well. So the attorney, the insurance company, a digital forensic organization, and public relations. And what I'd recommend doing is, getting those relationships in place before an incident happens, because it'll be very difficult to find somebody on the fly. And then lastly, I'll just mention that all incident response plans should have a step in there where you pause to determine whether or not litigation is likely and if evidence should be retained. And let me explain that a little bit. A lot of times what happens with organizations is they get, let's use the case of ransomware. A ransomware comes in, the immediate knee-jerk thing to do is, let's shut down the computer, let's rebuild the computer and restore the data. That will fix the problem, or at least it will be an attempt to fix the problem. However, if you didn't take a snapshot of get the event logs and take a snapshot of what was on that computer, you've basically destroyed all the evidence. And that may be okay if you're not going to go to litigation, or if you don't need to collect the evidence. But I think that it's important whenever you have some sort of an incident, somebody at the executive team says, wait, before we do anything, could this go to litigation? If so, we need to preserve the evidence. Let's get the appropriate people involved, specifically digital forensic.
Thanks, Jeff.
Back to you.
You can have all the security you need, you can have all the plans to respond and all that. But as you know, technology changes on a daily basis, and so do the cyber threats and the sophistication of cyber criminals. So how do firms stay on top of these changes? Your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think two things, and it is a big challenge for most organizations. One is there should be a function within the organizations that's doing threat intelligence. So keeping an eye on what's going on within the global threat environment, so that we can identify, what may be applicable to our organization. There are different feeds that can come in, like from US CERT, CERT, is one data source. There are multiple other ones that can bring in additional threat and intelligence about what's going on in a global environment. The second thing is really vulnerability management. Hardware and software vulnerabilities happen all the time. Where an exploit, you see all the patches for Microsoft and Adobe and Cisco, Citrix. Vulnerabilities come out. It's really important for organizations to have a cadence of making sure that they continually patch and update their hardware and software. And that's a real challenge to have that threat intelligence and proactive vulnerability management for many small and medium-sized businesses. That's why it's also, I think, a really good thing to at least consider, outsourcing to an organization that really has specialization and expertise in that area and that can provide 24/7 coverage.
Thank you, Jeff. Earlier, policy indicated that it takes more than 200 days for a company to detect that they've been compromised or not. So what are the things that companies that should do to improve their detection and response capabilities?
Right, that's a really sobering stat, Lucas. But I think the companies need to realize that 100% protection is just not possible. People make mistakes, software can get exploited, people will open up an attachment that can bring in a virus. So things will happen, and 100% protection is not possible. So, I think that it's really critical for organizations to get that detection and response capabilities in place so that they can identify indicators of compromise proactively. So you shrink that 200-day window between a network is compromised until it's discovered to possibly minutes or hours to really limit the damage and take corrective action. I'll give you a couple of examples. If you have detection and response capabilities in place, you'd be able to see things like if somebody trying to log into the CEO's Office 365 account from China. That may be normal behavior if the CEO is traveling to China, but it may not be. But without having the instrumentation, being able to see that, you would never know. Other things would be like if you see a large data file being uploaded to a Dropbox account. That may be an indicator of compromise that either somebody internally or externally is trying to take data off of your network for their own purposes. It may be perfectly normal as well, but you need to have the capabilities so that you can identify, deviations in end user behavior as well as in network behavior, so that you can quickly identify, detect, and take the appropriate response plans. The last thing I'll just say, another key component of that is having advanced endpoint detection. A lot of organizations have typical, antivirus and anti-malware on their systems, which is great, but those are looking for known vulnerabilities. Advanced endpoint protection can take a look at is there a program on a computer behaving unusually or behaving like ransomware, so that it can also ideally identify those unknown attacks or new variants that could be what we call it, that don't have a remedy out. That's called a zero-day vulnerability. So getting tools in place for that advanced endpoint protection can really safeguard an organization. So back to you, Lucas.
Thanks, Jeff. Let me move on to Nishal Kusial, who has been waiting patiently. Welcome, Nishal, our local cybersecurity expert. What is the board of directors? What is the board of directors' governance role in overseeing cybersecurity, Nishal?
Right. That's a very good question, Lucas. Kindly appreciated. Firstly, I just want to say it's quite exciting to be part of this forum with the learned colleagues. Also want to extend a note of thanks to the audience for their astuteness in attending the discussion, especially in times where cybersecurity is one of the most important and growing areas in business as a whole. But now back to the question, and I think it's fair to say that by now, people are aware that an adverse cyber incident can have significant consequences for an affected organization. The news that we see nowadays is frequently reporting that companies have incurred fines and penalties for failing to manage cyber risk adequately. More lawsuits are being filed for losses now than ever before for customer data and significant reputational harm cases as well. All have been incurred as a result of hackings and data breaches for many. So this has a direct impact in the expective effect of the mandates of corporate company boards to be more aware of cyber risk and more responsive to these incidents. So it's quite an expansive topic, but let's touch on a few macro points of importance regarding the board of directors level in governance and fiduciary duties as per the question. I believe firstly, what should be one of the points of import is that a board should educate and endeavor to at least have a basic level of strategic understanding with respect to the digital industry that the company operates in. Like, for example, does your company have financial transactions online? What type of marketing media are you present on and are hence exposed to? Those kind of questions would be important in understanding the digital operating landscape that the company has. And moving away now from the academics into the practical, the next question the board of directors should ask is that, is our company capacitated effectively in the cyber risk realm, or are we deficient? And this is not just a technical question. The question should expand into the realm of, do we have proper structures in the place on the executive level support-wise, the strategic level support-wise, and the operational level support-wise? Alluding to some of the experts' opinions regarding marketing, do we have a marketing response plan in our incidence levels? Do we have a contingent backup disaster management plan with respect to recovery? So those kind of things are important questions also to engage. Boards should also be aware, and this is quite interesting because now we are moving more into a strategic realm on a legislative base. We should also be aware that there's a jurisdictional element to governance and fiduciary duty. And this influences both system and information security management. A company is exposed to various jurisdictional requirements if they are positioned in different countries and is a multinational player. Litigious content in one country might not necessarily be the same in another. As a matter of fact, there was a recent case where the same multinational company released information of client demographics within the UAE and then in Guernsey. And there was dramatic differences in the legislative requirements and hence the prosecution with respect to the company. So it's quite an interesting question. And as a final stab, I'd like to also put onto the table that it's quite important that we consider risk holistically here. It's a responsibility of the board and the elective experts that advise the board to digest the risk management and internal control elements of all codes as it relates to the company's operation, in lieu of the digital space as well. So this is where the risk management and auditing leaders can synergize well with the cybersecurity competence. In conclusion, we're seeing that a lot of companies in industries are slowly in our economic corporate landscape, slowly but surely moving into more technological awareness and moving away from peripheral awareness of cybersecurity, digital forensics, and technological risk, and making these a true, real, and regular focus subject in all board of directors' agendas. All right, thank you, Lucas.
Thanks, Nishal. So, Jeff, considering that most board of directors are typically not tech savvy, what questions should they ask about cybersecurity to their IT guys?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Nishal did a great job, talking about the governance responsibility, but it's challenging when organizations or people that are on the board don't have a technical or an awareness of cybersecurity. But that's okay. I mean, I think that it's really good to ask some pretty simple questions in the board of directors meetings. One of them would be, hey, what are our top risks that our organization's facing? And then how are we managing those risks? I think that those are very legitimate questions to ask of the senior leadership, and they can bring in their operational and IT experts. The other thing as a board of director I'd be wanting to ask is, are we allocating the appropriate level of resources, that would people as well as money, in order to protect our organization so that we can be successful? So really, the board of directors, as Nishal pointed out, has got a governance responsibility, and part of that is making sure that risk is managed appropriately and that we've got the appropriate level of resources that are allocated. And then lastly, I'd ask, what is our plan if we have a data breach? If we had a data breach to our organization, how would we respond? And you can, by asking just some basic questions like that, you should be able to get a feel for what maturity level an organization's at, and if they're taking cybersecurity seriously, and if there are some red flags, well, then it would be probably a good idea to investigate a little further.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and that's very interesting. Then I have to ask the following questions directed at Nishal. What cybersecurity regulations should companies be aware of? And how do companies assess if they have adequate levels of protection? Nishal?
Thank you for those two interesting questions, Lucas. I think for the sake of just ensuring that we answer it adequately, I'm going to tackle the first question. So allow me to focus on the South African landscape for the first question specifically, because I think that if we are going to debate intercontinental legislative requirements, we're going to need much more time than we have. So in context of South Africa and in context of the laws and regulation at present, the legal framework related to cybersecurity and by extension cybercrime are a hybrid of different legislative cores and applicable common law. To expand on that, offenses are normally, when they are related to cybercrime, regulated under the ECT, and that's the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act 25 of 2002. The ECT has various sections, but in particular of note, sections 86 and 87 recognize and actually quantify offenses against activities which are defined as hacking, denial of service, and phishing. So this is quite a good legislative base for us to explore and to work from, and is normally where the South African legislative landscape firstly derives the judgments of. Just as another point of note, when it comes to the ECT, for the panelists and for the attendees, there is going to be a draft cybercrimes bill that will eventually be promulgated, and it's currently within the space in the SA legislation landscape. When it is in effect, it will repeal and form precedents over the ECT, so this is worth noting. The Cybercrimes Bills B6 of 2017. Onto another legislative framework, the POPI Act 4 of 2013, discourses on the obligations of parties in safeguarding data. And this relates to cybersecurity and the adequacy of your cybersecurity mechanisms within an organization. And of course, depending on the nature of your business, you would be exposed to specific specialized requirements per industry, depending on the regulatory body that your industry ascribes to. For example, RICA within the telecommunication and communication sector, or FICA for the financial sector. So one should be cognitive of the operating industry as well as the operating sector and any extensive and extension legislation that needs to be interpreted in the cybersecurity sense as well. So as a final note, when it comes to the legislative environment, consider that I'm sure many people are aware of the King IV Code. Basically, it's a corporate guideline for holistic company strategy and operations, but that's oversimplifying it. A point of note is that if your company is JSE listed, it actually becomes law that the board of directors need to be cognitive of, that the compliance to King III is mandatory. So in a nutshell, the King III also has certain states and statutes within itself, which dictates frameworks around cybersecurity and the management of data. It's worth noting as well. So I hope that adequately answers the first question with respect to the legislative landscape. And when it comes down to how do you determine if a company has adequate protection? That's quite a loaded question, and I'm going to simplify it. Of course, taking a snapshot of the holistic information that has come from these learned forum members would be important, but as a snapshot, let's consider the statement that a company has adequate protection today does not necessarily have adequate protection if it doesn't change with adaptation in exploitative technology tomorrow. The digital landscape is malleable, and new cyber attacks are being formulated every single day. So the company needs to indoctrinate a protective culture within itself. Be aware digitally, be up to date, operating system, defense patches, be offensively defensive. So don't wait for an attack, gain knowledge. One of the learned colleagues, and both of them actually mentioned within this discussion, that let's talk about proactive detection. Be aware, have mechanisms in place which can detect breaches and potential issues even before they happen. Don't only concentrate on the old type, but look for suspicious activities to quantify new variants of exploitations. Number 3 would be move from a position of reactive to proactive. We mentioned this, that this is actually one of the more important things, and I wanted to highlight it out on its own merit. So realize the importance of intelligence gathering and test the parameters of your cybersecurity landscape continually. Be vigilant and continuously monitoring your environment is one of the best things that you could do to ensure that you are continually protected. Of course, this question and what I've done in the sense of a summary can be more explored and expanded extensively, but I trust this has shed some light into the answer. So thank you for that, Lucas. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Nishal. That was very comprehensive. But one final question before we tackle questions from the audience. And this question will go to Jeff. Jeff, what tools and frameworks are available to assist companies in securing their systems?
Yeah, thanks, Lucas. Let me answer that two ways. First of all, the frameworks. One of the general frameworks that's available to all companies was published by the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. And so it's called NIST, N-I-S-T, and they've published a cybersecurity framework. And it's a real simple framework for organizations to be able to assess their maturity level, their current maturity level, in the 5 key areas of cybersecurity. And those 5 key areas are identify, prevent, detect, respond, and recover. So those 5 areas, that is just a general framework where you can assess your maturity level, set a target, and then move things forward. The other thing is, the other question was, what tools are out there? And it really kind of depends on organization's maturity level. But for an organization that is looking for a place to start, one of the things that I would recommend doing is taking a look at what does their organization look like to a potential hacker. And so let me open up I'll show you an example of that in just a second here. So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, Jeff.
Information, okay. So this is a tool that we use for ourselves as well as for our clients to get a general overview of what your digital footprint looks like. And so by taking a URL, just in this case, whipley.com, I can go out and take a look at, it's looking at open source databases on public information about what the vulnerabilities are that are available or that are exposed on Whipley. It also can give some different, financial models about what the likelihood and severity would be of a data breach, as well as compliance. But let me just spend a couple moments on taking a look at the technical safeguards. So going out here, I can take a look at, for my organization, just based on the domain name, what information is available and where are our top vulnerabilities that are externally facing. And so from here, I can drill down and take a look at our riskiest assets. I can take a look at things like within credential management. Do we have any data leaks, or people have had their username and passwords leaked within the last 90 days? In this case, there were none, but I can take a look at older than 90 days. And these would be coming from like public sources. And so if LinkedIn, for example, had a data breach and people that were Whipley personnel were part of that data breach, we'd be able to see that here because that was publicly available. And you'll see here it says Joseph Eve. That is one of the firms that we had acquired. And so this data breach was dating back to 2017. Regardless, it can identify some hotspots. And if I see that employees had been part of a data breach, I'd ask them to make sure that they've changed their passwords immediately and they're not using the same password that was part of that data breach. So this is a good, quick way to go out and take a look at what could a hacker see about my organization that they could potentially use to compromise our security. So if there's like one tool of a place to start, this at least gives visibility into what a hacker could see looking at open source information. I hope that that's helpful. So back to you, Lucas.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Just to make sure that we take our audience into consideration, I'm going to go through some questions from our audience, and I'll start with a question from Vishnu Naidu of Kwemvelo Concept. He wants to know, how do companies navigate around the shortage of cybersecurity skills? That is, how do they attract skills and how do they protect their organizational technology landscape? Nishal, can you respond to this, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Vishnu. That's actually an insightful question. I think what's going to be quite important is that, firstly, the identification of any sort of lack of skills within an organization needs to be done. Secondly, when it comes down to the industry and what's available within industry to supplement, what we would normally do is that we would engage on a local base to look for the skill sets. And we have supplemented in past all of the lacks and all of the unavailability of skills in a local sense with international partners and contingents. Keep in mind that when it comes to a cyber attack is not always locally based. It is internationally based. It can come from anywhere. There's no jurisdictional element when it comes down to who is attacking you. So there are skills which have been nurtured globally. I think when it comes down to leveraging and understanding the skill set, that'll be one element. A second element is that you have to align to organizations which have an actual contingency plan moving forward with respect to its cybersecurity evolution. When it is that you are partnering with an organization of a cybersecurity nature, it needs to be aware that it needs to also evolve with what's happening in the market. And by evolving, capacitate additional resources and transfer of skills in order to ensure that your organization understands and is in a better position to respond to attacks. So academically, what we've seen, and we can actually talk from an academia point of view in the university space within South Africa, there is a move towards capacitating computer forensics and cybersecurity and analytics in current curriculums. And it's only a matter of time before the academic field moves into the actual business and corporate field in order to capacitate. For the time being, I think it will be good for us to be vigilant, to leverage what we have locally and supplement with what we have so far as partnerships internationally go. But as time goes on, we are ensuring a maturity model within our South African space, which is slowly evolving. I hope that answers the question. Thanks a lot, Lucas.
Thank you, Nishal. Mr. Buldeo from BCX wants to know what is the opportunity cost of ignorance of a company's cybersecurity needs and what is the impact? Jeff, can you answer that, please? Jeff, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. No, that's a good question, but it's also a loaded question. You know, if an organization, first you have to identify, you know, what are those crown jewels? What are the things that are you really need to protect within your organization? You know, so for some organizations, it could be, you could be having, you know, financial information or healthcare records, which would be very valuable to a cyber criminal to sell on the black market. You know, others, it might be around intellectual property and trade secrets. And so I think that first you have to identify what are those critical assets that you're protecting. And then you can kind of get at your question of what is the impact of ignoring cybersecurity? Because if cybersecurity, if you did have a cyber event and those assets were compromised, you know, what would be that overall cost to your organization, and not just financial cost, but also cost as it relates to, you know, damage to your brand and reputation. And so that's a long way of saying that, you know, it really kind of depends on each company, but there certainly I'd argue that every company, if they had some sort of a data breach, there would be some sort of a cost associated with ignoring the security controls. For some organizations, it would be greater than others based on the assets that they have.
Thank you, Jeff. Another question from the audience, I think it came. Nishal, because you spoke about legislation, so how do companies know which privacy breach or legislation is applicable to them? How do South African companies know when GDPR is applicable to them?
All right. I think when it comes to the legislative environment, definitely an interesting question, and it is a circumstantial question as well. First of all, I think it will be prudent for a company to understand its operating model as it relates to data, and then from an operational base, move that into a compliance sense. The whole element of legislation falls under the ambit of governance, risk, and compliance. And when we are looking at risk and compliance and governance holistically, one of the elements is applicable legislature. There is a very simplistic way to look at this. If we have data within our organization, then by extension, all legislation that deals with the management of information and data should, in a form or element, be applicable to us. Of course, there are specialities and specialisms when it comes down to it. Like, for instance, what type of data are you actually having? There is an archival act, and again, it has to do with understanding the environment you are operating on, quantifying what data you have within your environment, and then applying the legal discretion on the basis of cybersecurity experts to determine, okay, does the POPI Act actually apply to me? Does the Basic Disclosure Act actually apply to me with respect to state secrets? Does the Act of the ECT apply to me with respect to how I manage my information? And you'll see 9 times out of 10, if you are managing data, all legislation, and this is not a cherry pick exercise, all legislation that deals with data should in a way or form be having an oversight with respect to discretionary calls from the legal teams of a firm, the discretionary call of the technological teams in the sense of the cybersecurity experts, and those firms should have a forum and a caucus to ensure that, all right, from a legislative and legal point of view, the legal team has elected that this is our stance. The cybersecurity team has elected this is our operating model. Is there a match? If there is a match, let us actually put a policy in to ensure compliance. So it is a gradual and a discretionary call based on the experts around the table on both the strategic board level as well as the operational level, but it behooves a company to actually be aware of what environment it is operating on, use its discretion with the experts around the table, and then apply policies and procedures to ensure compliance. Thank you, Lucas. Sorry, Lucas, you are muted.
Thank you, Nishal. At this stage, I think I will end the Q&A session. We will respond to our audience in writing. And one thing that I think the audience should take away is the fact that securing their information or data is a question of ensuring that companies must do, because customers or clients trust organizations with their data. Hence, organizations must take good care of their data. On that note, I would like to hand over to Mr. Morar to do a thank you and a concluding note to our audience and to our panelists. Mr. Morar.
Thank you, my friend Lucas. Well, this has really been an eye-opener for myself, as it certainly has broadened my initial knowledge and experience with regard to cybersecurity, especially with the questions that have come through from the panel and some from the audience as well. I think we want to assure all the panel, all the participants that all your questions will be answered. There has been one very interesting comment. Is there a forum for cybersecurity, which came through from Warren Koopman? We'll definitely research and come back to you, not that we're aware of. But if you are interested, we, as Morar Incorporated, will definitely initiate such a forum within our expertise. There are some other questions that our team would then respond. On that note, I would really like to thank all participants for making your time, for joining us. Please bear with us that we had to limit it to 1 hour to pay recognition to everybody, because it's an afternoon webinar. Because of our international partners, we wanted to really have Jeff's experience and etc. We would be sharing with Jeff's experience and day on information, a 30-day cybersecurity tip that will go out every day. We have your email addresses. We will then send that out on a daily day. If you are aware of anybody else that would like to get any other information on this, please do not hesitate to get them to send it to cybersecurity@morar.co.za, cybersecurity@morar.co.za. But to the panelists, my colleagues, thank you very much for sharing your expertise and knowledge, and to Jeff especially. It's early morning in the States, but thank you very much, Jeff, for being participant and joining us. And really it's a true partner with us in terms of our international association. And to our facilitator, Lucas, a humble man, but experience in the IT sector goes back approximately 30 odd years plus, so you didn't want to pronounce his CV because it's, but believe me, colleagues, that we are very fortunate to have a facilitator with his knowledge and a partner to Morar Incorporated. To our panelists and to the audience, if there are any further questions that you may have, whatever they may be, please do not hesitate to email it to cybersecurity@morar.co.za, and one of our experts will respond to yourselves immediately. And before we go, we want to note that and advise that we will be doing a follow-up cybersecurity webinar with also international partners from Malaysia on the 25th of November. More details will then follow. And we will then share those invitations at that point in time. We want to then also say that please note that a lot of the questions that have been posed, we are a firm, and they should, with just a parting note, it's not that it's a free meal, but please be assured that we have the expertise, we have the knowledge to be able to provide assistance to many of the firms in cybersecurity and in terms of IT consulting. So don't hesitate to give us a shout. Don't hesitate to use our experience. We're not expensive. We're not dollar-based. Jeff is charging us in rands, and our fees are based in rands. So believe me, give us the opportunity, and we can rest assured you will not be disappointed. And once again, thank you very much for already accepting my invitation and the invitation of all our directors, and have a good day further. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lucas.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great day. We'll respond to all your questions as Mr. Morar has indicated. We'll engage with you, and if you have any follow-up questions after the responses, engage with Morar and they'll get back to you. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.